After 40 years of global dominance, the second largest economy in the world, China is facing a property crisis, steep local government debt, weak consumption and high unemployment. Despite the fact that China is the largest exporter of goods in the world, with a total export value for 2022 alone of over $3.78 trillion. So why a massive giant like China is facing its economic downfall?
China, the Chinese economy has slipped into deflation.
China's banking sector is facing a major crisis that may have significant impact on the global economy.
China is currently experiencing a deep economic crisis, or simply put, an deflation. Growth rates are slowing, and the country's debt to GDP ratio hit a record high of 288% in 2023. A significant portion of this debt was used to buy assets that no longer produce enough income to cover the debt, particularly in the housing sector. Housing sales have plummeted by a third since their pre-pandemic peak, and new construction has fallen by 60%. This is one of the most severe housing crashes globally in the last 30 years. Many Western pundits and politicians interpret this crisis as evidence of the failure of China's leadership and economic system. However, this situation is more similar to the cyclical debt crises seen in capitalist countries throughout history. A fitting comparison is Japan's crisis in 1989, which brought an end to decades of high growth and rising asset prices driven by a growing debt bubble. Japan's Nikkei stock index peaked in late 1989 and dropped nearly 80% over the next 13 years. Real estate prices also fell for 2 decades starting in 1991, and neither major asset class has surpassed their pre-crisis peaks since. Japan shifted from being the fastest growing major economy from 1954 to 1973, typically growing over 10% per year, to one of the slowest, with growth averaging only 1.75% per year from 1981 to 2023. China may face similar long-term challenges. China's remarkable economic rise was driven by an even more significant expansion of debt following Deng Xiaoping's market-oriented reforms in the late 1970s, known as the Four Modernizations. The obvious aim of this policy shift was to rebuild its economy and society, which were devastated by the Cultural Revolution. This policy shift also appears to have been prompted by the recognition that the incomes of ordinary Chinese were so low, in comparison with incomes in other Asian economies, that the future of the Chinese state and the communist regime would be in jeopardy unless something was done to raise the living standards of its people through economic growth. The government subsequently established a number of areas for foreign investment, including special economic zones, open coastal cities, economic and technology development zones, delta open zones, peninsula open zones, open border cities, and high-tech industry development zones. The establishment of these zones triggered massive inflows of foreign investment, primarily from companies in Hong Kong and Taiwan. At the same time, China promoted its socialist market economy concept, which led to an entrepreneurial boom within China. Inflows of foreign capital, technology, and management know-how enabled China to turn its vast labour resources and space to rapid economic growth. The shift to an open-door economic policy ushered in a period of high economic growth in the first half of the 1980s. By 1998, per capita income, though still only about $770 was 14 times higher than in 1980. Therefore, it seems reasonable to conclude that Deng Xiaoping's first goal, which was to improve the economic status of the people, has been accomplished. Like Japan during its post-war economic miracle, China's growth was fueled by a boom in exports and real estate. In less than 50 years, China transformed from an impoverished, centrally planned economy with minimal international trade into the world's leading exporter and a close second to the US in the number of billionaires. However, the story is different now. China experienced a property boom that led to the construction of numerous replica cities, including Little Manhattans, Little Hong Kongs, a mini Paris, and an English village with little red phone booths. These cities, meant to replicate famous global landmarks, remained mostly unoccupied. The idea was that these physical structures would attract people to leave rural areas like Anhui, Hubei, or Henan for wealthier communities with palm trees and fountains. This construction mania did not result in rich communities, and all the money invested disappeared. Loans created deposits, and government stimulus pushed up overall economic activity. Starting from 2009, this flood of money prompted crazy consumption in autos, casinos, and investment products. Despite the sudden wealth, basic incomes did not rise significantly, and essential investments in health and education were neglected, especially in rural areas. This neglect meant that China's population did not benefit from the advancements needed for a modern economy.
The Chinese economy has been hit by a series of blows, including a real estate collapse.
We begin tonight with China's latest crisis, the housing crisis.
And part of that is because this isn't just chaos. This isn't just the economy unwinding. This is an intentional effort by the government to deleverage the property sector in a big way so that property will no longer be this powerful driving force for growth going forward.
In 2021, the illusion of perpetually rising property values collapsed, leading to economic weakness. The Chinese economy had been heavily reliant on property speculation, and no officials were willing to stop this risky practice. Currently, banks report that 70% of their assets are tied to the property sector. Bloomberg Economics estimated that a 5% drop in housing prices would result in a loss of 19 trillion renminbi, around $2.7 trillion in wealth. Several property developers have already defaulted, and bank deposit rates have been reduced. Investment schemes that once offered better returns were dismantled by regulators aiming to redirect cash back to banks. As a result, Chinese consumers are becoming poorer. The scale and speed of the disappearance of Chinese banks, especially before the Communist Party's third plenum, which ended on July 18th, is unprecedented, although there was no mention of it during the 4-day conclave. Nearly 40 banks have gone under or been merged with larger banks in the week before June 24th, according to reports. Overall, China's sluggish economy, combined with bankruptcies of large property companies and a weakening stock market, has fueled fears of a major financial crisis reminiscent of 2008. The economy has 340% of its GDP in banking system assets. Over a third of said assets are lent to the Chinese and Hong Kong real estate sector, which is experiencing its own crisis, down 30–50%. The resolutely anti-China Liberty Times reported that nearly 3,000 Chinese banks are technically bankrupt. Bearing the brunt of the crisis are the smaller banks that are currently facing a savings and loans crisis. Since 2019, several Chinese banks have gone under, with the situation being most complex at smaller agricultural banks. Based on research of 27 local banks, as of the end of 2023, bad loans to the real estate sector have grown by nearly 30% compared to 2022. Since the 2021 collapse of Chinese real estate companies such as Evergrande, Country Garden, Sino-Ocean Group and Soho China, Chinese banks have come under severe pressure. Evergrande alone had ties to nearly 180 Chinese banks, with several of them having faced bank runs in the aftermath of its bankruptcy, the report said. In response to the real estate crisis, the Chinese government has implemented several measures aimed at kickstarting the housing market. For first-time buyers, down payment thresholds have been lowered, mortgage interest rates reduced, and the criteria to qualify as a first-time buyer have been relaxed. Meanwhile, existing mortgage interest rates for millions of homeowners have been cut, and a novel policy allows for the rollover of loans to the next generation, helping target the ageing demographic. Despite these interventions, the loan support of $64 billion by the end of March is considered small against the size of the crisis. The government's actions have yet to provide a sustainable solution to the underlying issues plaguing the sector, leaving the future of China's real estate market uncertain. In addition, due to the bankruptcy of high-profile real estate developers, the public has lost trust in banks, according to reports, triggering bank runs in various cities. Analysts warn that the growing number of bad loans at Chinese banks remains a ticking time bomb with severe consequences for China and the world once all of it unravels. Meanwhile, as the situation worsens and public confidence drops further, it could lead to bigger and more frequent bank runs. The government is likely to further push for mergers among banks to solve the problem, because Beijing lacks a proper mechanism for banks to leave the market.
Yes, youth unemployment hit another record high.
Unemployment in China is at a record high. The numbers came out yesterday, we told you about them. More than 20% of the youth in China is unemployed.
But analysts say the record high youth unemployment number indicates a structural mismatch in the labor market.
Some of the factors contributing to youth unemployment in China are similar to those seen globally, such as insufficient private sector job creation and skills mismatches. In 2024, nearly 12 million new graduates will enter the Chinese labour market, but there aren't enough jobs to accommodate them. Regulatory burdens also hinder growth in technology sectors that typically employ young people. The youth labour market in China has unique challenges. Young workers face cultural expectations to work extremely long hours, often referred to as the 9-9-6 schedule, where employees work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Many young people are unwilling to work such long hours, leading to a movement known as lying flat, where individuals opt out of traditional employment and pursue a minimalist lifestyle instead. Additionally, a rigid education system in China prioritizes standardized test scores and academic achievement over practical skills. This leads to an oversupply of graduates in certain fields, such as engineering and finance, and a shortage of workers in others, such as healthcare and social services. To address these issues, the Chinese government must create more jobs in the private sector, particularly in high-tech and service industries. This will involve reducing regulatory burdens, providing financial incentives for startups, and investing in education and training programs that align with the needs of the job market. This economic crisis poses a significant threat to the political stability of China. President Xi Jinping's third term could be marred by public discontent and social unrest. His government's missteps in economic and financial affairs have alienated private investors and damaged confidence. Xi's administration has focused on boosting production without sufficiently supporting domestic demand, leading to weak consumption. The resulting low GDP growth has pushed China towards deflation, with consumer prices falling and the producer price index declining for 8 consecutive months. The rapid development of China's new energy industry has only exacerbated deflation. An economic transformation aimed at reducing China's reliance on investment and debt and boosting innovation, technology, and productivity will face significant challenges. China's economic strategy, especially its focus on competing with the US, is deeply tied to ongoing geopolitical tensions. The US and China have been locked in a trade war for years, and China's push to boost its manufacturing and innovation sectors is seen as a direct challenge to the West. This could lead to more economic confrontations. Experts warn that China's focus on rapidly expanding manufacturing to drive growth could lead to overproduction which would worsen trade tensions with the West. This might push the US and European countries to impose even more restrictions on Chinese exports and technologies. The US has also introduced tough export controls, limiting China's access to advanced technologies, and has banned certain US investments in technologies that might strengthen China's military. Additionally, tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, steel, aluminum, and semiconductors have been significantly increased. Some US states have also passed laws preventing pension funds from investing in companies controlled by the Chinese government. If the US continues to retaliate, it could complicate China's efforts to stabilize its economy, especially at a time when it's facing persistent deflation and slow growth. China now needs to navigate through these challenges with careful planning and strategic reforms to ensure a stable and prosperous future.